Hey folks, Evil Pajamas here with another Civilization 6 video. It's December 2020, so we've had the Heroes and Legends mode along with the Babylon Civilization for a couple of weeks. This video is primarily for folks that have previously tried out difficulty settings that are a little bit higher, like Immortal or Deity, but didn't have much success and maybe got frustrated and just sort of went back to the lower difficulty levels. With the addition of Heroes and Legends and the additional availability of secret societies, if you were wanting to give those higher difficulties a shot and previously you just didn't enjoy it for one reason or another, you found it too hard or you just didn't like the randomness, I think that now is probably a better time than any to get into that higher level difficulty mode because these modes offer a toolkit for really dealing with the early game advantages that the AI has. Now, I'm definitely not like the greatest player. You can see that, I have some losses and I don't win in a particularly fast fashion, but I did want to show this quickly just to show that, the strategies that I'm going over, they do work with a variety of leaders and that I'm not just sort of theory crafting or making stuff up that doesn't work. We'll start in this video with a late game map state showing the game state around turn 250 or so to show what our options for victory are, and then we'll go back through and see how we got there, and specifically try and account for how we adjusted our strategy in the beginning to adjust for the new Heroes and Legends mode. Alright, so we'll be showing the end game. We're not at the end game, but we're nearing the end game in the current playthrough that I'm in. If you reach this point in the game, 9 times out of 10, you should win. And the reason for that is it's just a matter of sort of managing how aggressive the AI is at this point, and then you always have the diplomatic victory condition sort of in your back pocket. So let's take a look at where we are on this particular playthrough. We're on tier 248, so the game's dragged on for a decent amount of time, so it's not going particularly fast. We're at 53 tax research versus 57 for the leader, and we're just a little bit behind on the space race if we were trying to go for that victory condition. So you can see we've got 13 turns left on the spaceport, and Hammurabi has launched the satellite. So we aren't terribly far behind in that regard, and we are generating a reasonable amount of science. In this particular play, you can see that I went with the Leyline Secret Society, and we've gotten a lot of great people. That's actually something I will point out as we're going through some of the playthrough. But we're generating a decent amount of culture, so even if you're going for a science victory, you need to generate a certain amount of culture really so you can get through the civics tree in a reasonable time. And then our military strength is pretty reasonable in comparison to the AI, and that is a deterrent for them to declare a surprise war on you. We're leading in the religious victory category, so you can see here, and this is one of the things late game that a lot of times the way the AI plays is they will tend to exhaust a lot of their faith, and what you want to do is sort of play defensively until they've exhausted a lot of their faith, and then manage your apostles in a way that you're leaving one charge back on the apostles that have the theological combat bonus. So that way you're getting conversions without completely exhausting through your apostle, and you can use them to kill off other civs religious units. And you can see here I did get fortunate here that I had a nearby Mount Vesuvius that's erupted a few times, so I have a very solid set of tiles here. This is my starting city. So the thing that I was mentioning about always having diplomatic victory in your back pocket is that basically if you get to this point in the game, you should almost always be in a position to get diplomatic victory because the AI votes in a very predictable way on any difficulty setting. So as you can see, we've set ourselves up for multiple victory types, so we'll start back at the beginning to see how we got here. So if you're looking to play at the deity level, you're probably already familiar with certain concepts about, how to place your initial starting city and how to walk your initial warrior to explore, that you're going to want to try and make pace on flatter, non-hilled lands. So you'll walk your warrior up towards the flat area to cover as much ground and reveal as much of the map as possible. And then when you're scouting out to place your settler, you can hit the 4 key to see where the water sources are while you're assessing whether you want to just hit settle city or if it's worth moving to get to a better spot. So if you're coming up from a lower difficulty setting, there is a habit that you might be in that is something that you might want to try and get used to breaking out of, and that is to simply set what you're building or what you're researching in terms of your civics or your scientific research and just work it all the way until completion. So you should get out of that habit and get into the habit of dynamically monitoring how many turns are left on that. And as you explore the map, to account for the new information that you've gotten and adjusting what your initial build picks were based upon that new information. So here we're on turn 3 and we get new information immediately. And I didn't walk that direction because I knew this map or anything. I walked that direction because the northwest was full of foliage and the eastern path was the only way to walk to and looked like it was possibly clear. And you can see to the west and the southwest looks like the edge of the landmass. So that is why we walked in that direction. At the early point in the game, anytime that you discover a natural wonder, a tribal village, or a city-state, at that point you really should be reassessing whether or not you are still making the correct picks for your construction and for your civics and research. So in this case, what happened is we got the astrology boost, we got a governor title, but we did not get a trigger for discovering a hero. A hero discovery might be a reason to switch there from Slinger to Monument, but there could be other reasons to switch, like we'll see here. It's early and we're on turn 3, that's going to affect what governor selection we make here. When you're making that governor selection, you don't want to make any presumptions about what you might discover in the future. I mean, you can do so. I just think that it's not a good idea to do so because you might not run across what it is that you're expecting to and picking up that second title. So what you want to base that on is the presumption that you're not going to get a second title until you research it in the Civic through Early Empire or whatever Civic you happen to be researching that will give you that title. So this is the reason here why I go with a really unorthodox choice here of Reyna. So the standard choices that most people would make here are Magnus, Liang, or Pingala. So the reason that I did not go with Magnus or Liang is I haven't picked up enough information at this point to want to switch off of that slinger that I'm building. And because I don't have that information, I don't know whether I'm going to be making a builder or I'm going to be chopping, even though there are good chops around here. Those chops are jungles for the most part, so that's going to be later on. So I'm not going to take an early Magnus. And there is not a whole lot to build with the extra charge there with Liang. Now, Pingala is a good choice, except that I'm not expecting a rapid growth in population at this point, which is what you really need to ramp up Pingala. So for that reason, I took Reyna for the land acquisition ability, which is going to expand my borders out a little bit faster, which will save me money on buying those tiles out towards Vesuvius. If you recall, before we started discussing the governors, I did mention there might be a reason to switch from Slinger to Monument here. And the logic behind this is because now that we have locked in a governor choice and we know we aren't going to be generating extra culture, if we don't switch to building out that monument, we could hit a real drought in culture that will really slow up our growth in terms of that civics tree. So at this point, we haven't seen any immediate threats, and we know we aren't going to be able to accelerate into the monument via chops, or at least via efficient chops. Then we are going to need to switch to building that monument. Likewise, we won't have Pingala to generate the additional culture. So I flirt with the idea of flipping from pottery to the astrology, which we just got the boost on, but that is actually an incredibly greedy play that can get you in a lot of trouble early. It's a very aggressive play towards religion, and if you come across anything that is an immediate threat, you'll likely get overrun if you do that. So I end up backing out on that decision. So we end up with an early scout run in, an early city state meet, and then an early eruption of Vesuvius. So the combination of the early scout meeting and then finding the city state and the eruption, actually all three sort of factor in to turning back around and going back down, because the scout likely came from a camp, and if that camp is in the area of where Vesuvius is, I want to secure that area so that I can gain access to those tiles sort of freely without having to worry about there being barbarians running over them. Where the city state factors in is because we've gotten that meat already, I'm likely going to change directions anyway because I'm not going to want to run all the way past that city state. So I'm going to run back somewhere in the other direction because I want to try and find another city state, and it will be less likely to do so if I walk all the way past the one that I just found. You always want to make sure that you are looking for an opportunity to buy good tiles should they come up and fit into your strategy. And then the other thing you always want to make sure is if you are aware of how effective your early game units are versus barbarian, warriors, spearmen, etc., depending on what terrain they are on and what terrain you are on, so that you can correctly attack and defend and manage to clear out those camps without actually losing your unit. So you'll notice here that initially I select mining after completing pottery and then switch to irrigation. And the reason for this is because the value in taking mining, obviously besides having something to mine nearby, which there isn't, would be to open up masonry and bronze working. But right now we only have two barbarians to clear out. So we are not likely to get the kill three barbarians, at least based upon the current information that we have. And there isn't a nearby stone for us either, to because the eruption killed the other stone. So we finished Code of Laws, and we obviously are taking discipline because we're fighting barbarians. And then the second choice is sort of up to you on what strategy you're taking. I like to take the Faith Gold one just because I like to start working on getting points towards a Pantheon. Now, the other thing here is now we can flip back to our partially completed Slinger, and what we want to do is try and manage the Barbarian health in a way that will give us a chance to get the boost for Archery by getting the completed Slinger over there and getting one of those two kills. Here you see me making what I later conclude is an error based upon hindsight, where I opt to heal instead of taking the camp out when they abandon it. And the reason I opted to heal is simply because I likely would have gotten killed had I taken the camp out and would survive had I taken the heal, which I did. But this ends up being a really bad choice later. Here you see that I'm sort of vacillating between settler and builder. I'm not entirely sure what my thought process was there on settler, but I think builder is the correct choice there, mainly because I'm finishing up irrigation there as well. I know that I'm working that tile, but the main point here is that I'm choosing between infrastructure options rather than more defense, and you just have to understand the terrain around you, whether you have good defensive positioning. So even if you're outnumbered and it looks like you're in a bad situation, just to see how much you are able to control the situation with the units that you have in play without building initial units at that time. So if you think you can gauge it correctly, that you can fend off that camp and clear it out, then you want to continue building infrastructure, even if it looks like the barbarians are sort of gaining the upper hand there. The other thing to keep in mind is that we don't have any improvements down for the barbarians to pillage. So there's no loss if we gauge incorrectly here, really. There's nothing for them to pillage, and they can't take the starting city. So barbarians can't take a capital, and there is no immediate AI threat around. So that is why if you're in this situation, you probably likely want to just go ahead and build your builder or whatever infrastructure that you chose. You'll also notice here that I am switching from an incomplete craftsmanship to foreign trade, and the reason that I'm doing this is because I'm hoping to get 3 improved tiles to get the boost by the time that I finish out foreign trade, and then probably also stall a little bit in the mysticism. And this is sort of a personal preference because the thing is by not going directly as fast as you can into state workforce and early empire, you aren't getting those additional governor titles as fast as you could. But on the flip side, you're spending turns on production for the Civic that likely could have just been completed by a boost that you will eventually get. So that's a personal preference, but you want to sort of to keep that in mind. And if you need the governor title and you absolutely need to do it and you can't wait for the boost, then just stay in that. But otherwise, you want to manage that a little bit. So our plan here is to go into Settler, and the reason that we're now in sort of a hurry to get into Settler is because that eruption tile is looking very attractive to the north of Mount Vesuvius, but it's not a tile that we can reach from our starting city because it's 4 tiles away. So we want to get our settler out there, but the problem is that there is that uncleared barbarian camp because I wasn't willing to sacrifice my warrior to just delete it and then have my warrior die in the process. So now we're having this little dancing game with all of the barbarians that are still out there, and it looks like there is reinforcements coming from the north. Despite this, it's not terribly worrisome because there again is nothing for them to pillage. So we have a lot of good defensive terrain around, and the barbarian AI is really not that smart. So for the most part, you can use the terrain to your advantage here and sort of stall. The only thing that sort of sucks is that my settler is not going to be able to get out there and settle. The other thing to remember about that barbarian scout is like 90% of the time, even if they are able to take a warrior or I mean a worker or a settler, I mean by worker I mean builder. They a lot of times they won't. They'll walk the other direction. That's not like a guarantee. I'm not sure how they decide if they're going to take it or not, but they don't always. So sometimes you if you want to take a calculated risk, you can leave a guy next to a scout. I would never leave them next to another type of barbarian unit because that type of like a fighting barbarian unit will always take it for the most part. But so as you can see, we have our Pantheon choice now, and based upon the layout of the terrain, we obviously don't have any rivers around, so River Goddess is off the table. And then out of the other options that remain, the most likely choices here would be Divine Spark to get the extra Great Person points, or Sacred Path to get the bonuses from the Rainforest. Now, the problem with both of those is that they actually require having the Holy Site down, as opposed to some of the other options where you would start immediately benefiting. But since I don't have like any tile improvements down already that already benefit from those other options, the Holy Site ones look more attractive. So we're going to end up going with Sacred Path here over Divine Spark, just because there is a couple of spots where it looks like we're going to initially be able to get, like at least 3 extra bonus off of adjacency from those rainforests without actually limiting what we're able to chop too much. Like we're still going to able to leave ourselves some chops as opposed to having to be super careful and not chop anything. We'll still have access to some chop. So we're going to close out here on the initial video. This will be turns 1 through 50, and then we can continue on a separate video for the rest of the turns. And I'm sorry that we didn't actually run into any actual hero for the Heroes and Legends part of the content, but we did discuss a little bit how to make some of those considerations and how that might affect, how you're selecting between Monument, Slingers, Scout, and so on. So if this looks like an interesting map and you'd like to see a little bit more of this playthrough, would love to have anybody back that's watching. So please go ahead and like, subscribe, or whatever it is that you'd like to do. So I do appreciate everyone watching, and thanks, and have a great day. Actually, as I was editing here, found out that this came closer to turn 45 or so, but that's where we're going to leave it off. You can see I'm about to settle the second city, and we can go into why we selected that location in the next video.